Today on Panelism, we are decisively and absolutely answering the question, why art? Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask. Hey.
Hello. We have been chatting for more than an hour. And I interrupted you because I was like, we should just record this. And I thought it was interesting because the last episode we actually recorded together was sort of a, what is your stay-at-home playlist? And you just were just getting started on a tear about how your podcast listening habits have changed. Get into it.
I'll just jump in. Yeah. We had a whole other extended conversing that we may flesh out again at another point in time. But it's interesting being being sequestered at home for most of my day. I have more opportunity than not to listen to stuff, music, podcasts, etc. But I was out for a walk and I've been going on this beautiful hike behind my house pretty much daily. And it's about an hour hike. It's gorgeous. Right, kind of off of Manitou. I don't even have to drive. I can just walk over there, get on it, get back. And I usually have my AirPods in, and I usually have a podcast episode I listen to on the hike. Well, on Friday I was doing the hike, and I had actually encountered a new album by this duo called the Cactus Blossoms. I don't know if you know who they are.
Oh, no, I don't.
If you are interested in retro West Coast country, I highly recommend this duo. They are fantastic. I've been telling people they're like a combination of the Eagles, the Everly Brothers, and a little bit of Marty Robbins all rolled into one. It's fantastic. And they have an album that came out last year called, I think, Easy Way. So if you're wanting something specific to listen to, but all that to be said, my hike was more enjoyable than it otherwise would be. And it kind of started this cascade of revelations about the fact that I just haven't been listening to enough music lately. Like usually my audio consumption is, I would say, historically 70% music, 30% podcasts. I think in the last 3 to 6 months that has gone to 10% music, 90% podcasts.
So you were trending this way even before the pandemic lockdown.
I was, yeah, probably since about New Year's. I was trending this way, and then the lockdown just made it. Yeah. Even more so because everybody's putting out new episodes. It seems like daily. Yeah. Jesus. And then they're all COVID related, and I don't listen to all of them.
Oh my God. No kidding.
There's just more content now because I think the people who do shows who I normally listen to, they're home too. So they're putting out more content because they have nothing else to do. Yeah. And so I've just been listening to a lot, and it in addition to just thinking or knowing that my podcast consumption has gone way, 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 way up, I started to think about what am I listening to? And it's a lot of really heady, very kind of deep intellectual stuff. Everything from like Brett and Eric Weinstein to Sam Harris to podcasts that take an intricate, deep look at the stock market. G0 World with Ian Bremmer, like all of these like very serious, very important podcast. There's another one called Artificial Intelligence with Lex Friedman, the Jim Rutt Show, all of these, and they're great shows. Don't get me wrong. I'm not slamming any of them. They're wonderful. But when you start to listen to every one of these things every episode of every show, your entire day is consumed with just listening to these crazy, highly, very forward-thinking, relevant intellectual conversations, and you're not taking a break. There's not a mental breather. And then I started thinking, well, how did this happen? Because when I first started really getting back into podcasts again, kind of around 2011, 2012, when kind of this wave that we're living in kind of started, I think.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this on the show before of how, we've been aware of podcasts for almost 20 years now, but it was only in like 2011 or something that all the software and apps started to like really coalesce and make it easier to, listen rather than like a Google Reader thing where I'd subscribe to RSS feeds of podcasts and had to download individual episodes and then offload them to an iPod or something. But go ahead. Sorry.
100%. Yeah. I mean, but like, back in the day, the Adam Curry show, and then, there's, I think early Ricky Gervais was, kind of that 2004 to 2006 period. So they were around and I enjoyed them. But like when I first jumped back in a big bad way about 10 years ago now, actually, it was really, I probably had maybe 5 shows total I listened to, and they were all kind of frivolous, like the Kevin Smith Smodcast, which is wonderful, but it's very funny. It's very sort of, pop culture-y, whatever Ricky Gervais was doing at the time, the Lost, the TV show Lost podcast. So it was stuff like that, right? It was stuff that didn't require a lot of bandwidth, and it was just more entertaining. Like I could just listen and like be doing other shit like cooking or cleaning or working, and it just would be on in the background. And sometimes I would listen to those episodes multiple times because I didn't.
Oh my god, that original Ricky Gervais show that he did for like The Guardian or whatever, like where it was just like 10 episodes where we all met Carl Pilkington. I just would replay those constantly to listen to Monkey News.
Oh my god, 100%. And I still do from time to time. I think I kind of like The Office, like the US Office. I listened to it so much that I started like quoting it like as it was happening.
Was it because it had more of a radio quality in those early days where and now it's more of a documentary quality? Do you think that's one of the things?
Maybe. I also think that like in the early days, a lot of the smart people who are doing podcasts now just either didn't have the notion or the know-how or
the tech.
Or were just scared to put their thoughts out there on a regular basis. So and granted, there were a couple big hitters who started doing podcasts that sort of paved the way for a lot of these other public intellectuals to jump in and do their own shows too. So it was a combination of a lot of stuff. But I look at my podcast queue now, and it's, Smodcast is still there and Fat Man on Batman are still there, but I would say everything else is very, kind of that intellectual, high heady stuff. So I'm spending 4 to 5 hours a day just ingesting all that stuff.
Yeah.
And it's creating, I realized it's doing this thing to my brain where like everything is viewed through that lens of like everything is important and everything has to be thought of at a high level, and like there's kind of an urgency around everything I look at and take in, and it just became so left brain that I think I've gotten exhausted. So then all this to be said, when I was out on that hike, listening to music while walking almost seemed like a novel thing again. Like, oh wow, this is enjoyable. Like I can actually like give my brain some space to play and just sort of relax again. And I took that pretty seriously to the point where I wrote down all the shows I would subscribe to, so if I ever wanted to find them again, I could. But I stripped everything down to 6 shows total.
Wow. Okay, so let me ask you this. Prior to the strip down, what was the app you were listening to your podcast in?
Pocket Casts, and that is still the same. That's my preferred one.
Does it allow you to create different playlists or queues or anything?
It used to let me do playlists when they NPR bought it like 2 years ago, and then they did an update about a year ago where they took the playlist functionality out. Sadly, it was a bummer. So I can star episodes, but I can't like create playlists and stuff in that way.
Interesting. Okay, so what I did was I've got Stitcher as has been my main podcast consumption for probably almost more than a year. I pay for the pro version, so I have those. I can't remember what they call them, but they're basically playlists. But it's like when I subscribe to a show, I just choose a list to put it on. So I have like a favorites playlist that's all kind of easy to digest stuff, and then I have like a news playlist, and then I have like a series playlist where it's a lot of, like if I more in-depth series where I want to listen to the whole series all at once. And then I have like a, interviews playlist where it's like, because I realize like I can't have these all just showing up like in a feed because, I'm listening to some chewy bubblegum kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden comes on like a long interview with something very intellectual, just exactly like you're talking. It's like, I'm not in the mood for this right now.
Yeah.
So I think that consumption, I'm interested in like how people consume it. And sorry, I feel like I derailed you with that.
Oh, no, that's okay. And actually, while you were talking, I remembered I haven't tried out Stitcher for a while, so I'm downloading just to compare again.
Well, let me tell you this: Google Podcasts that I had written off like 6 months ago or something, and I'm not saying it's because of me, people, but I had several times during Google Podcasts. I love the simplicity of like, it's just a feed. It's like everything just in chronological order, but it drove me crazy that I couldn't add things to any kind of playlist or queue. They introduced a queue recently. I don't know why they're doing this, because who knows how long Google products last. We could rant about that for 2 hours. But I had been using Google Podcasts for the past couple of months to listen specifically to, and this is so geeky, actual play podcasts of role-playing games. Because if I'm following a story in one of those, I often just want to go to the show itself and then go in like reverse chronological order. So I need to like, scroll down to the bottom of the show, find the episode I left off on, and just hit play and let it just sort of go through. I can't have it go through like what's most recent. I want to hear where I left off.
Sure.
A serial kind of podcast, well, now they've just got this queue feature, which makes me think, well, I should start switching over some of the series and other things that I listen to back to Google Podcasts, so that when a new episode comes out, I'm like, oh, just add that to the queue. And then I'm almost sort of making a master playlist of like everything I want to listen to. But all of this to say, the reason I interrupted you 10 minutes ago before we were recording was because during our lockdown, I have actually, those first couple weeks, it was like the series podcast just started falling off my radar, like anything. I mean, not even if it was like current events, but anything like heady and intellectual, I was like, I just can't handle it right now.
Is that because you didn't, the current time we're living is stressful enough, or you just have other things to do?
No, I think it was a lot of, because of some subtle changes, although like I'm a freelancer and I work, out of my home or like in a coffee shop or something, not anymore, but, I'm not always in an office, but it used to be that I was in a space where I could listen to a podcast, have it on the background while I'm doing my work and sort of ingest it that way. And during the pandemic, because I'm at home and because my clients are very amped up about emergency and critical communications and things like that, it's like I'm already dealing with a higher level of stress. I can't put something in my ears that's, even if it's not current events, I can't listen to a serial killer podcast or something because it's like serious stuff that's like, now I'm getting like a double dose of emergency hormones all the time.
Yeah.
So for a couple weeks there, I just went hardcore into RPG podcasts and was picking up like, games that I was like, oh, I want to check out this game. Let me listen to an actual play podcast about it or whatever it was. Let me see how this cast handles this adventure that I heard on another podcast, whatever. But for the past 3-4 weeks or something, like after that first week of the lockdown, I pretty much went solid music. And there are only like 2 or 3 podcasts that I'm even listening to now.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. So I kind of had this flip. So that's why I wanted to, interrupt your flow before we started recording and say, I think that's actually an interesting thing to put on here. I know the first week of the lockdown, a friend commented to me like, oh, you just can't escape news. I even tuned into panelism and you guys were talking about like your stay-at-home playlist. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry, man. We've contributed to that in a way that we thought was sort of, a relief from it. But I quickly noticed the same thing in that week of like every podcast I listened to mentioned, well, we're staying at home and here's our
Yeah.
And it's like, oh man, you just don't want to hear that news all the time. It's like, a
little escapism is healthy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think coming up later in this show, we have such a great escapist book to discuss that we've both read. So I thought, do you think, or how much were your podcast habits and this recent paring down of everything, how much of that was influenced by the world we live in right now?
I would say maybe 25%, because the frequency in which, like I said, some of these shows are putting out content now probably wouldn't be as high were we not in COVID times.
Right.
But at the same point, like I would have gotten here anyway at some point this year. Yeah. It's just like when you take in and it was even affecting my productivity. Like I'd be listening to something that was, maybe a 2-hour episode on a really juicy topic, and they were dissecting it down. And, I'd realize like I'm not getting nearly as much done as I used to. Like what happened? And then just I get in the cycles where I'd wake up, I'd make my morning coffee, and I would put on like Spotify has 1,000 different amazing jazz playlists. So I'd have my jazz on, and that would be my music for the day, and that's it. So I wouldn't even be listening to like music that I truly liked listening to. It was just more like very dutiful, like listening to my jazz and my podcast, and then that's it. And it sounds a little weird saying this because we host podcasts, and so I don't want to. I want to be careful about not just dismissing the medium. That's not my point. But it's
no. Exactly.
I think there is there's a listener responsibility that I didn't anticipate, that because we're living in a time where there is so much amazing content, I have to double down on being a good curator and really, understanding the balance more than anything. I think earlier on, it was easy to go, I'll subscribe to this. I like this. I'll subscribe to this. I like this. Now I have to really think like, okay, I already have 2 shows that talk about artificial intelligence and like, the future of humanity. I probably don't need a 3rd one. Or if I do, maybe I should, which of those 3 is the best one and just listen to that one. Or like, I'm kind of a follower of this philosophy / lifestyle called Game B. And there's a lot of people who host Game B related podcasts about, where does society go from here and how do we do all this stuff? And some of that's hinged on COVID, or at least it's making it more juicy to think about, but probably don't need 3 of those either. I just think getting back to a sense of balance. I'm going to make a very hard tangent into comics though, because this is something I thought about with comics as well.
Yeah.
I, right before lockdown, I've talked about the store here in Colorado Springs, Escape Velocity, who hosts our book clubs, and I've had Daniel on from Escape Velocity, and hopefully we'll have a few more. But they had a second store on the east side of town that closed down before COVID. So they actually it was great timing. Fortunately, they don't have to worry about that store. But I bought a huge stack of stuff there, and it was all great stuff. But I got home and I'm like, man, I've got books on my shelf that I love, but I will probably never read again. And I don't know, maybe it's better if I deliberately pare down my whole comics collection to something a little bit more manageable. Because when I first started getting back into comics, when we first started doing this podcast, when it was originally the Todd and Taylor show in like 2016,
15 actually.
Jesus, wow. My collection was probably a 4th, if not a 5th, of what it currently is. And I kind of oddly took more enjoyment from all my books then than I still enjoy them now, but I think there's so many of them. It's kind of like it gets hard to keep track on what haven't I read, what have I read, and then there's a giant TBR pile next to it. Yeah. So it's just like, maybe I should be more deliberate across every dimension of my media and consumption, and just be really super I'll use the word deliberate again. Super deliberate about curation and understanding that. I think that is a huge something we never really anticipated about a culture where there's so much amazing stuff to consume.
Yeah, I was going to say that leads right into what I was going to bring up as related to that was we've heard things about like the paradox of choice and this thing in digital consumption where there's just so much to consume. But I think there's the flip side of that, or a related factor is then there's the anxiety of the TBR pile. Mm-hmm. For me, the sundoku, or I think that's the Japanese term for the stacks of books that pile up everywhere. And I feel that not only about books or shows, and podcasts. Like I look at, when just talking to you, when I pulled up Stitcher to look at my example playlists, I realized like, oh my God, there's there's so many shows on there where I haven't even listened to it. I just know like, oh, that sounds like something I'd be interested in. Subscribe, put it in this playlist. I'll get to it later. Yeah. Well, yeah. I'm adding more things to those lists than I am listening to. So there's literally no time for me to listen to all those things. And I need to be deliberate, as you said, and like diligent about just clearing them out. Like just declaring the old term, of email bankruptcy, where people would just, I don't know if you ever remember those like minimalists that they would send like an auto reply to everyone, say, hey, if I have not responded to your email, please send it again because I've deleted it, where they would just like wipe their whole inbox because it was like, I'll never get to all this shit and I can't figure out what's actually important to me to respond to. So I'm just deleting it all.
Now, I don't recommend two things. One, hopefully nobody's deleting this podcast as they're listening to this episode going, oh my God, I don't really listen to panelism much.
Listening.
Please, this is absolutely essential listening. But I also don't think everybody, like, the idea is not to Marie Kondo all your books and give them all away except for 5. Like, that's not the solution. That's too far the other way. So it's like there is a sort of, and maybe it's a Western culture thing that, a tool we need to develop living in a Western society where we just need to be more mindful about curation, about when you buy a book, maybe a book goes away, or just kind of keeping things in managed so that you truly appreciate them at a deeper level, and then when it becomes obviously clear to add something new, you do.
Well, if anything, that is the subtext to all panelism episodes, because you have been ahead of this and had already talked to me so much about it before we started a podcast, which was like, we need a better curation engine.
Yes.
And I think before we were doing the podcast, you were thinking about it in terms of like, what is this, a blog, or is it like a search engine, or is it something that curates the best of, or the most, you don't need all the knowledge. You just need the knowledge that's appropriate to that search or that time or that personality or something. And when we kept trimming the fat and turning panelism into panelism, it was because it was like, no, we need to talk about books that are worth having on your shelf. Like, that's the curation. Yeah. We're not doing negative reviews, or like, rarely do we ever want to do those. We actually, I think whenever we do one, we have a discussion beforehand of like, do we want to badmouth this book? Because our show is really about what is worth keeping, and hopefully that pulls us around to where did it pull us out of the
yeah, no, we're back on track now. Do you want to talk about our book this week, or do you want to dally in a few other things before we jump into the book?
Let me hit one piece of news. I'm sure you've heard this, but Comic-Con has been canceled.
I saw that was not surprising, but it was a little surprising they were holding out as long as they were.
I agree. But I do think it felt like the appropriate moment, actually. Like, I had wondered why we weren't hearing news during March, and to get it last week, I thought was fully appropriate. Because I mean, honestly, and as I've told the story before, like, I caught swine flu at a Comic-Con.
That's right. Yeah.
In 2009. You're in a cramped. It's not even the space that's cramped. It's that there are so many bodies there. Yeah. You are flesh on flesh with people, with like 250,000 people that migrate to San Diego that week, and 100,000 something in the convention center, and you're like, this sucks.
Yeah.
There's just no way that like, you're not having like 2,000 people there with COVID-19, asymptomatic or something like, it would be impossible to escape that being like a hotspot of contagion. So I am relieved that the choice was made. It sounds like from the announcement what they're going to do is allow badge holders to just transfer to next year.
Same thing with if you bought a booth. It sounds like that if you wanted to transfer, you are allowed. And then anybody who had a hotel room, that's being refunded.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems like a pretty clean and user-friendly decision.
And I would imagine the last month has been a lot of negotiation to figure out. I mean, because that's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, that's true.
Figure out how to do all of that, because this is, a huge moneymaker for the city, and they have to figure out how to, how to do this safely and efficiently for all those businesses. So it's a big relief. I was not going to feel comfortable at San Diego Comic-Con this year, and was already wondering how I was going to take precautions. So, in the nick of time, if they'd waited another month, it would have been, I think it would have just been, the anxiety level would have been going up. Like, because there's no way around it. Like, it's not prohibitively expensive for those of us who live in Southern California, but it's still, when you think about a few $100 just for the badge, you're like, man, this isn't like a concert ticket that I can just sort of, like lose, like sunk cost kind of thing. This is like, this is 5 days of the show. So
yeah.
Interesting. Well, yeah, that'll be, and maybe next year is the year I go. I don't know.
I did think that. I was like, it'll be next year that we finally get the professional situation figured out.
Yeah.
It's like, I've got this badge rolled over, and it's like, I finally got in as a pro. Whatever. It'll be good. a relief, I think that's my takeaway from it.
Well, before we jump into a book, because I think this book is going to occupy the rest of our conversation, but I want to quickly touch base on anything you're watching that you enjoy. I fell into the rabbit hole over this weekend. Disney Plus has so much, as you know, so very much. And I got sucked into watching every episode, but a good chunk of Star Wars Rebels.
Oh, really?
The animated series. Yeah. And very well liked. I've seen glowing reviews about it. A lot of people dig it, but I never really, I didn't realize it was on Disney Plus until recently. Because it was airing, I think, on just Disney XD or whatever it was. But it's on Disney Plus. The thing that really sucked me in, are you familiar with the character Admiral Thrawn?
I actually am.
You are? Okay, good.
I don't know anything about it. It's just that name comes up a lot.
If you're listening, you don't know who that is. Thrawn is the blue guy in the white kind of captain's uniform you see in a lot of books and supplemental media. Well, Rebels is the first live, not live action, but filmed thing that contains him. And I remember that was announced. And I was like, well, that's cool that Rebels is doing that because he's a really compelling character. A lot of people who read the novels, he's probably their favorite character. What sucked me in was when I heard him speak. I was instantly taken. I think his name is Lars Mikkelsen. Yes, it is. So the actor who voices Admiral Thrawn is Lars Mikkelsen. If you don't know who that is, he played Charles Augustus Magnuson in the Sherlock series with Benedict Cumberbatch. Amazing character. He plays the kind of equivalent to Putin in House of Cards, and he's been in a lot of different things. He's a very tall, kind of very stringy kind of actor, very good actor, but his voice is unmistakable. It's kind of this very soft, raspy, kind of Swedish or Norwegian-y kind of accented voice, and it is so pitch perfect for Admiral Thrawn that I ended up looking up on Wikipedia every single Star Wars Rebels episode featuring Admiral Thrawn, and I watched all of them.
Wow.
And then I basically finished most of season 4 between Friday night and last night. I just binged till I was dead. It's an amazing show. The animation is incredible. If you like Clone Wars, which a lot of people do, this fits nicely between Clone Wars, and I think they're doing a new series now called Resistance, if I'm not mistaken. But this matches that animation style. All the canon is in there. They make a lot of references to Clone Wars that I think will make fans happy. They make a lot of references that the Mandalorian picks up on, both in terms of the dark saber and Mandalore and a bunch of that stuff too. So if you have been, I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan in the world. I'm a fan, but I'm not a super fan. I loved Rebels. It's
great.
Is
the animation style like the Clone Wars animation style?
Yeah, it's that 3D, and but it's really well done. Their use of shadows and light. Some of those scenes you're looking at them, you're almost convinced that they're real places. It's very well done.
I'm honestly still processing that Lars Mikkelsen is the brother of Mads Mikkelsen, who is Galen Erso in Rogue One.
Wait, they are brothers? Are you serious?
Danish.
Danish. I apologize. I said they're related for real?
Yeah. Who knew?
Where are you finding this?
The Google machine.
He and Mads are related. I mean, they don't look alike, really. Huh.
I didn't pursue that. I just looked up Lars to look at his face.
You're right.
And
God,
saw
that's
Mads,
holy crap. I love Mads Mikkelsen. He's one of my favorite actors too. So they couldn't be more different in terms of their performances and the characters they choose. That's fascinating. It's not like the Gleason brothers, where Dahmel and Brendan and all those guys, they all look. It's obvious they're related. Yeah. Or my other one is the Skarsgård gang. They're all, you can tell they're all related.
Skateboards.
Yeah, these two guys. Skateboards. Anyway.
My only follow up to that, because I don't want to get too off topic with other shows I'm watching, but I will tell you that one of the 3 podcasts I'm listening to consistently is called Newcomers with Lauren Lepkus and Nicole Byer. two comedians in LA who had never seen a Star Wars anything until earlier this year, and they are watching them in release order. So every episode of theirs is like, New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, and it is cracking me up. I mean, they're really, and it's not like they're. I think they're effortlessly doing this, but they are walking that line of like irreverence, like they're not worried what the fanboys are gonna say about stuff.
Good.
And they have such a pure enjoyment of it, or not enjoyment. It's like it's just really funny when they watch it and they're like, actually I liked Jar Jar Binks. He's my favorite character in that one, and it's just really fun. But yeah, I think someone threatened them with like having to watch the Clone Wars or this new series that you're talking about, and they were like, "Oh my God, there's cartoons of this stuff."
Oh Jesus! Who was it? We were talking, I think maybe offline. Who was it that did a dub of A New Hope, but they made it such that Jar Jar always spoke Gungan, and suddenly that character makes way more sense. Like when they took away his like English, they just basically made it like they put like English subtitles, but they basically had somebody overdub the voice was just like Gungan speak.
That's not Topher Grace's thing, is it?
It might be. So if you don't know, Topher Grace edited together all three of them. Is that right? Like A New Hope, not A New Hope, but Clone Wars through Revenge of the Sith.
The prequels he made into one movie.
One solid movie that kind of focuses more on Obi-Wan as like the main character, and apparently that's amazing.
In his edit there is no Jar Jar.
Well, that's fine too.
Or
but like
Jake Lloyd.
If you're gonna have Jar Jar though, like all of a sudden that makes like Nine Numb never had like some crazy like I'm Nine Numb. It was just like he speaks whatever the English or the language was, and there's like English subtitles. Jar Jar suddenly makes sense. Like I think it's on YouTube. You can just go see like all the Gungans speak Gungan, and it makes infinitely more sense than to try to have some cockamamie like hokey accent.
That weird Chet Hanks patois.
Yes. Hey, one more for you. We talked in our last episode about this amazing little show called Devs that's on Hulu and I think FX, but who cares? Like Hulu's the main place. It has since ended, and oh my God.
And this is actually shocking news to me that you revealed right before the podcast.
Yeah, because you thought it was 4 episodes or something.
Right. I had pitched it to you as being on the stay-at-home playlist. I had watched those first 3 episodes over the first 3 weeks. Episode 4 came out, and for some reason I had in my brain that was the conclusion. And I was like, you know what? I'm not ready for it now. And it was just one of those weeks of just, all the anxiety and everything. And I was like, I'm not going to watch this dystopian vision wrap up this week. And then right before we recorded today, you're like, oh, so you've watched all 7 episodes. And I'm like, what?
Oh yeah.
So there's 8 total.
I think so. I think it's 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's over. Like it's done now is what you're saying.
It is done. And it's one of those shows where there won't be a sequel. It's not like season 2. So no. This was like Watchmen. It was just one vision of Alex Garland. I'm not going to say anything because if you haven't watched past episode 3, get ready.
Yeah.
There is so much more. All I'll say is this. It would be interesting to see what this would look like if somebody edited all 8 down into like a solid, tight 3-hour movie.
Yeah.
I think it would work better because there's a lot of amazing scenes, but there's a lot of kind of filler that
there already was in 3 episodes.
Yeah, and then the character of Lily, like, that actress isn't the strongest actress in the world, and you find yourself more and more caring less about her and more about everything involving Nick Offerman and Katie and the Devs team itself. Like the more they get into that whole thing and the people who work in Devs, it's like that's all you care about. So it's and Lily, her character does have relevance in the end anyway. So it's good that she's there, but if you want to go down a deep rabbit hole, get on Reddit and go to the Devs subreddit.
Oh boy.
Talk about heady. Like I just stopped doing that completely. In addition to stopping some of these podcasts, because they talk about determinism at such a high level that like I'm like I don't know if even Alex Garland intended that to be the case. Like remember back when Lost was going on, all of the crazy fan theories and people getting really into the weeds, and I was one of them about like life and death and good and evil and all like that looks like a child's party compared to the discussion on devs. It's like it's at such a high level. You almost need a doctorate just to participate. It's pretty crazy.
Interesting.
Well, I will say.
Go ahead. Wrap up on devs because
I was just gonna say, if you haven't seen it, if you're listening, you're like, devs, what is that? Go to Hulu, start watching it. Yeah. You will not be sorry. Here's my pitch. Imagine if the show Silicon Valley was written and directed by David Lynch.
That is funny because I was going to say, what if The Social Network had been written?
That too.
Yeah.
It is. And I say, David, I mean, I could even say, I'll throw my boy Joe Dorowski in there too. Like the visuals are so amazingly beautiful. And like, if you liked Ex Machina, which Alex Garland did, like this isn't a sequel to Ex Machina, but it could easily play in that same headspace.
I would say it's almost like in the same universe.
There is
there's probably a theory about that, right?
I'll say definitively the show does not acknowledge that, but there are enough things that happen where and there's something that happens kind of at the end that you're like, oh, you could almost make it. You could really make believe and legitimately pretend that they're in the same universe. Anyway.
Speaking with my friend Todd Kemp about the anxiety producing playlists versus anything to relieve anxiety, he mentioned watching Star Trek the original series, which is a thing, brace yourself, that I have never watched. And so I've actually gone into it, and I haven't gotten very far, but it is quite enjoyable to just watch sci-fi that's not about this dystopian, terrible future,
or doesn't have to have like some seriously intellectual bent for you to appreciate it at any level.
But I mean, you can start pulling in the intellectual bent on that kind of stuff. It's not heady. It's just done in a very different,
Yeah, but there weren't any dribbles showing up in devs, right? Like there's a little furry tribble. Sorry, yeah, little furry creatures popping up and down. It's like no.
Another thing, and I'm sorry to keep extending this section of our show, but I also wanted to drop. You and I have mentioned tons of Image comic stuff over the years, and we have always liked that. What Image usually does is puts volume 1 of a series, they sell it for $9.99. So it's like you kind of have a $10 investment to see if you like a series. And then subsequent volumes are usually like $14.99 or $19.99, but you can get an intro for very little. They have got so many volume 1s on Comixology Unlimited right now. So basically for $5, you could join Comics. I think it's $5.99. Join for a month. Read so many Image volume 1s, see what series you want to follow, and determine if it's worth that to continue your unlimited subscription. And not only Image, there's just a bunch of good comics to get into on Unlimited right now. And it's obviously like, they're curating this for people that have, a little bit more time on their hands to stay at home and read stuff. So sorry if that sounds like a tangent, but maybe that's a good segue into talking about a comic book.
What's good about here's my pitch for Comixology Unlimited. Get it and then try before you buy, right?
Yeah,
you can
get 30 days or something, right? Or 7 days or whatever.
Well, if you end up liking a series, then go just buy the trade paperback at your local comic book shop as like the souvenir, as the memento,
the artifact,
of that. Yeah. So and sometimes, as we've discussed numerous times, the cover flow or page flow on Comixology is great for some titles, and some titles the actual physical artifact is a better read. So it's kind of fun to compare and contrast. I say all that just because I want people to continue to think about and support their local comic shops during this time.
Yeah. And great point. Thank you for bringing that back to that. If you need to put more things in your TBR pile.
Oh, Jesus.
But so I just love that you suggested this book for today, because you sent this book to me a year ago, like a year ago, Christmas, I think.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
And so I have a physical copy. I'm assuming you have a physical copy.
I do.
It's a Fantagraphics book by Eleanor Davis called Why Art? ? And it's such an enjoyable, like, it's like a fun read, but it pulls you into some stuff. And it was just a great suggestion to, like, cleanse the palate.
Yeah. Want me to do the back of the book?
Yeah, do it.
So this is, and by the way, shout out to Floating World Comics in Portland, Oregon, where I grabbed my copy and then was inspired to give Todd his. Like, this was sitting on their main shelf, and oh my God, that store is incredible. On the back of it says, "Why art? What is it? What is it for?" That's it. No, that's not it. These are questions that have vexed scholars and historians, makers of art and lovers of art since the beginning of civilization. What color is art? Can beautiful art be ugly? Can ugly art be beautiful? Does art distort life, mirror it, or duplicate it? Does art have a taste? In Why Art, we are guided through a metaphysical journey where the mysteries and regenerative properties of art are put to the test. Anyone who believes or wants to believe in art as a force will welcome this witty and ardent book by the critically lauded and award-winning cartoonist Eleanor Davis.
And from that, that sounds like you're about to get an intellectual treatise on art, possibly explored through art. And not that you're not, but I feel like you get that, and it's a little compact book. Like, it's not trade paperback size. It's, what is this, 4 inches wide by 5 inches tall. It's not quite a pocket size, but it's a little book. And you think, oh man, what is going to be in this? And the first page is why art? Before we can answer that question, let's explore some examples of different kinds of artwork. The most basic category of artwork is, of course, color. And then you flip the page and there is a black and white drawing of some objects and it says orange artworks. And then the opposite page, different different pieces of art, also in black and white, blue ones. Mm-hmm. And I remember reading that, like, when you sent it to me, and instantly knowing, like, oh, I got it. I get the vibe of this book. It's like it winks at you from the second page in there.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know if I'm wrong for saying it's fun, but for me, it is fun up until the last 10 pages or so. And I guess we have to describe a bit of it, but it's really hard because it's neither a treatise nor is it like a narrative, but it sort of is.
But here's the best way you could give this book to a 10-year-old and they would get it. They would have their own interpretation of it, but they would get it just as easily or as quickly as you and I, or as an 80-year-old would get it. It's so accessible in that regard, both in terms of the text, but also the drawings are very, I don't want to say crude. They're hand drawing, and they're not, it's very much to sort of make the point and get out of the way, right? They're not like building these elaborate, environments and everything. It's very much, almost kind of has like a flip book feel to it, where if you quickly flip the pages, you almost kind of has that sort of vibe to it. But it is, I wouldn't bristle against saying it's fun. It is fun. Like, that's one of the reasons I liked it.
I love the fact that you started with 10-year-old, because there's so many points at which I was reading it and didn't have that exact thought, but drew comparisons to the book Everyone's a A-Liban When You're a A-Liban Too, or by Jomny Sun. There's the simple style, it's these curvy, very intentionally two-dimensional images. Nothing's rendered to look three-dimensional or fool you, and any there's no Trump Loyal going on there. It's just flat cartoons, black and white throughout, and exaggerated features, like really long legs or really short torsos, or giant heads or small heads or whatever. And I felt like you go through a few pages and it's sort of, you're kind of wondering where it's going to go, because it's talking about artworks and but there are these kinds of artworks. There are large artworks. There are small artworks. And then all of a sudden it pulls you into this story about these artists that turns into an examination of the artistic creative process without really talking about that on the, to me, it's just, it's like all the why art of this is all subtext to what happens after that. And and I think that's the fun part too, is because you kind of feel like you're getting set up for the first maybe third of the book, and then you get pulled into this weird little surreal story.
That's to me the hat trick of this book is it itself is a beautiful surrealist exercise in as an artistic act, while also delivering to you that context in a very, very accessible way. this brought me back to my intro to art history, or just intro to like visual art in college classes that I used to have to take. Like it encapsulates like an entire semester into a nice little book, and it talks about everything from format and medium to commercial appeal to, you know, independent art, you know, things that, you know, you want to make just because you want to make it, you know, other people's interpretation of that thing, how the system can like spit you out, and just all of that stuff is there, but it's not like, you know, it doesn't push it in your face. It's just like you said, it's all kind of subtext. It sort of floats around you, so you can think as effortlessly or as hard about it as you want and be equally rewarded.
I like that, because you can read it as like just a goofy story, or you can read it as a metaphor, or you know, like, it just, and it's, you're totally right. Like that's all like sleight of hand.
Yeah.
Like how are you doing this? I mean, I was just really, I was just really entertained and amused, and like all of those good things when reading this. And I think more so because it starts out with this like absurdist premise of like, you know, classifying art by color or size or something, and you're like, everybody knows that's not what makes art, you know. It just seemed so like elementary or something. Like, where are we going with this? And it has this, once you get through the story, not to give anything about the details of that, I guess, but this theme of the recursiveness of the creative process comes up, of like, you're creating something that will be destroyed so that you can create something from the pieces of it that, you know, came from the destruction. So you can, you know, and then where is the artist in that process? Is the artist like the object that's, or I'm sorry, not object, is the, you know, are we the subject creating the art, or are we the object that's being created? Like, is our art actually us? And we are just an observer to the real us. And I mean, I'll let you take it from there on anything you think of. But
well, and you're touching on something else. I kind of alluded to it, but this whole thing could very well be a giant piece of poetry.
Yeah.
Like it's telling a story. Yes, it's providing context and insight into the artistic process as well as artistic consumption. But it as I'm flipping through it now, like it has a very poetic quality to it.
There's even like a Shel Silverstein vibe there too.
Yes. Oh, I'd never put that together.
I hadn't either till you said poetry, but that inspired me to say that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if a French Shel Silverstein wanted to do like an entire, like, you know, book about art, and it's a lengthy little book. You know, it goes quickly. You can probably get through it in, you know, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how fast you want to go through it. But you know, but you can get, I mean, I've read it through it at least 3 or 4 times, and I take away something different each time. And even if I'm just feeling like overwhelmed about, you know, consuming all this stuff, kind of like what we talked about at the beginning, or if I'm, you know, if I just feel like, oh, I've seen enough, you know, I've already been to enough museums, I'm good. I don't really feel that, but if I did, I'd pull this book out and just immediately fall in love with the art world all over again.
Yeah. I'll tell you another thing it reminds me of, and I'm so glad you said poetry, because I literally would not have made these connections. When I was younger, not knowing much at all about the Beatles, I bought this collection of John Lennon's poetry that had his sort of hand-drawn little cartoons in it, which were just like very simple and, you know, just line drawings, really flat. And looking at why art again, I'm like, oh yeah, it's all in that school of like, we're thinking about deep things with almost silly drawings about them, you know? And I love and even though we say surrealism in this, I think the way she talks about art and describes it is also talking about that magical process of it, or like how it makes you feel like it's magical. And then for her to represent that in some magical fashion, for example, I just flipping through and thinking about that, I landed on that page of, there's a little description of dioramas and making very small art, and this one artist that makes dioramas, and then there's a picture of a guy who's tried to crawl into the diorama, and it's only like his butt and legs hanging out. It's like as if the other 3.5 feet of his body or something got into this tiny box. And you know, that's so Shel Silverstein. It's so like surrealist, and I mean, it's I'm hesitating on describing it, by the but there's a Picasso-ish nature to some of the way her drawings are, where dimensions are flipped, or this face appears flat or something. And
I mean, I'm surprised this isn't available in every gallery or museum of note.
It should be.
It should. I mean, it's a great, again, I probably repeating myself too many times, but I look forward to giving this to a kid and be like, hey, here's if I had this when I was in 6th grade, let's just say, my life, I would have probably appreciated a lot more a lot sooner, because it really gives me that, it gives you that context in such a, it's so accessible that you feel good reading it, and then you're like, I'm enlightened now. I don't necessarily know why, but I'm open to the possibility of artistic expression more than I would have been. I would have probably gotten into a lot more interesting stuff earlier on had I had this as a kid. But now as an adult, I have it, and it's it just it kind of reinforces my, where my perception is now, and just makes me all the more open to new stuff anyway. So it's,
I agree. It's so approachable, and it makes you realize, and especially if you get that subtext, I wonder if a 10-year-old would get the humor in it, but especially if you get that, that it is teasing about art while also being art, it's not only the book that's accessible, but it's telling you art can be accessible.
Yeah. It's kind of like Shrek, right? It's, adults laugh at Shrek for very different reasons than the kids laugh at Shrek. And neither of them are wrong, but they, cleverly builds these jokes in that are perceived one way, and then, a different way when you're a little older. So it's it's kind of reminds me of that, but I should stop and say that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. You can kind of be flippant about it and say, oh yeah, a lot of movies and stuff do that, but that's really not. I mean, to make something that all ages, that 8 to 80 gets thrown out a lot. When people are designing stuff, this has to work for people 8 to 80. This book is a great 8 to 80 book, and it's you can continue to get new value out of it. I don't think there's anything more to say without spoiling or henpecking pages, which I don't think is necessary here. But
and it's a book with named characters in it, but they're the characters themselves are part of the metaphor and the symbolism. So it's, exactly. It's hard for us to talk about the characters or something. It's not built in any narrative way like that, where you need their backstory or something. I would just say, and please chime in on this, there is no reason, I don't even know if a digital version exists, but there is no reason to own this digitally. This is an artifact that should be in your house, period.
Yeah, it's funny you asked that. I was literally looking that up right before you said that. It is available on Comixology and Kindle if you want it, but I would echo that and highly recommend the physical copy if you can get your hands on it.
And as there's so much in it that is talking about the physical experience of art, or the experience you're having when physically standing in front of an artwork, whether it's the guy trying to climb into the diorama, or there's one of the deep dark truths where this guy's just standing in front of this black, rectangle painting that's reminding him of the dark truths. You're reading that as you're holding an artifact, staring at it, and I just don't think you're going to have that experience as, compressed as it is because of this small book. You're not going to have that in a digital version. So I mean, and it's a Fantagraphics, which means it's, it's really cool looking, and it's this great size.
Fantagraphics, if you're not aware, they're in the same league as Drawn and Quarterly. They do
exactly.
They do very good stuff. So I highly recommend it. Highly recommend it in physical. If you can't for some reason get physical stuff where you are at this time, grab the digital, but then get the physical anyway, because you're going to want it. But Why Art, Eleanor Davis, great little graphic novel.
Yeah, thank you for recommending we talk about it, and thank you for sending me this copy so long ago. It's a really cool book that I'm happy to have in the coffee table pile. I was trying so hard not to call it a pile. In the coffee table arrangement.
There you go. Coffee table arrangement of my deliberately chosen arrangement of books that happens to be on my coffee table. Could be any table, but just happens to be on my coffee.
Unlike the other books, it has been read.
That's right.
I didn't want to say it's in the TBR, that, but it's not a book that I am going to keep on my shelf. It's a book that's going to be on a table or like on top of the case. It's meant for someone who comes to my house to go, what is this? And pick it up and flip through it. Yeah. I also picture it as being one of those books where I'm very soon going to have to buy my own copy again, because this will walk out the door with someone. Like I'll be like, no, take it home. You got to read it.
Yeah.
You know? So
as you should. That's a great point. Exactly. This is one of the most giftable. That's what I mean. Yeah, I didn't even hesitate to send you a copy. I'm like, oh, Todd's gonna want this. It's easy. It's unintrusive. It's boom, and just keep sending it to people.
Yeah. Cool. Great suggestion. And as always, and in fact, we have labored this past month to make sure that we are accessible on every platform. You can find Panelism on all sorts of podcast platforms and at panelism.inc. Please let us know if you have any problems with any of those. The best way to get in touch with us is to follow our Instagram, which is panelism.inc as well. I don't know if there's any other plugs that need to be plugged.
I don't think so. Not at this juncture. We'll have more for you next week. And good.
Stay safe. Please continue sheltering in place and listening to the scientists.
Yeah.
Medical professionals.
To say the least. Yeah. And stay safe out there. Enjoy happy reading, and we'll be back next week.